Welcome to the Times of Industry show. I am extremely pleased to have on Dr. Ron Paul, who's, if you don't know Ron Paul, there's something wrong with you, because he is a two-time presidential, actually three-time presidential candidate in 1988, 2008, 2012. One of the bigger champions for constitutional money, for everything that has to do with being a free enterprise system and small government. And I am very excited to have Ron Paul on the show today. Thank you, Dr. Paul, for being with us.
Great to be with you today.
I want to ask you, if I may, about your son, Rand Paul, a Republican senator for the state of Kentucky. He tested positive for coronavirus. I read a piece where he talks about a little bit about the fact that he wasn't even supposed to be quarantined, and he, out of his own initiative, went on and tested himself and found it to be positive. He's now quarantined. I want to ask you, first of all, how he's feeling.
Oh, he's doing fine, and he's at home, and he has to just wait out the period. And nobody's really too concerned about it because he feels fine. And most people who are carrying that virus, they do feel pretty good, and most people don't get real sick. So we're hoping for the best in that regard. Okay.
And secondly, how do you feel about the public's reaction to the coronavirus, since it started off being almost like people brushed it off, saying it's like a flu, don't worry about it now. Then they maximalized it. We saw empty store shelves, and now they're almost like getting used to it, except for these hot spots where you see real lockdowns and shutdowns. But in many parts, people are still not understanding how this has to do with them.
Well, I think it's blown way out of proportion to the danger. And it seems that some people benefit from crises like this, people who want more government power and more control over people and want to get big appropriations and get their special deals passed. And that's what's happening now. It's a grab bag. So it's being used, and I don't see it as a problem dealing with one virus. I think it's dangerous when people get the virus and they're already sick or elderly and have other conditions. But I think millions of people probably have had the infection and still do. But it's used as an excuse by those who have a special interest to use that. And I think that is sad. But hopefully they'll wake up soon and say, well, it wasn't quite as bad as they thought. And maybe it's a combination of the virus along with another disease or medication or somebody's immune system. That's the problem. So yes, somebody's making political use of this, and it's out of control, because I fear mostly the people who love control. Even the local people, local officials, love the power that they're getting. Let's close down this county, and let's close this city down, put people under threats of arrest, and all these kind of things. So people are gloating with the power, but I hope the American people who are suffering from this will wake up and realize it's not quite as they describe it. I think that in many ways it's a distraction. They can blame everybody concentrate and worry about coronaviruses and then say, see, it caused a stock market crash. It caused an economic crisis, which isn't true. It probably aggravated things a bit, but the economic crisis is government made, it's Federal Reserve made. And I think the coronavirus arguments and the scandal that's going on there and all the fear is actually to distract people from the guilt that the government, especially the Federal Reserve, should assume because of the very, very serious economic crisis that we have. I think there's way too much concern given with the potential danger of the coronavirus, and very little concern and a serious understanding of why we're in a real bad economic mess.
So Dr. Paul, look, I want to touch exactly on that part. Obviously, in order to contain this, the economy has been halted. Literally over 2 billion people worldwide are now confined to their house. You told us already it's not the legitimate way to do it, but I want to ask you about the Federal Reserve and what it has done and what the Treasury has done with these rescue bills. The Federal Reserve right now on the daily is doing $1 trillion in repo. It announced infinite QE. It sent Neil Kashkari to 60 Minutes where he said we have an infinite amount of cash. I don't think that's the kind of talk that a central banker should be saying to, to investors and to everyday Americans and to politicians, that they have an infinite amount of cash at their disposal. Is this a power grab? Is this a abusive use of government regulation and legislation? Are they rewriting the books as we go along here?
Well, it's an abusive use of irrationality, because no, they shouldn't be saying it. It'll make things worse, but it is true that the Federal Reserve is responsible, and it's used, the coronavirus is used for them to continue it. But this whole thing is so much out of control. The financial system, we already had planned to spend $1 trillion this year over and above the income. And we thought, well, we have Republicans there. Isn't it true that Republicans are conservative? No, it's not true. And now look at what they're doing. The appropriation was under $2 trillion, 1.5, 1.8. And then the Democrat says, no, it should be 2.5 for this bailout package. So they settled for $2 trillion. That's on the verge of being passed, but all the special interests lined up for it, and they're thinking they're going to get it. But it's impossible. It won't solve the problems, because we got into this mess by too much spending, too much debt, too much inflation, too much manipulation, too much drive for zero interest rates. And that's what they're doing. They're solving the problem by spend even more, print even more, and get the interest rates below zero. And they think that's going to solve the problem, but it isn't. And I think that they would like us to believe that they will be able to solve the problem. They claim they solved the problem in 2008 and 2009, which they did not. They just sent more money to the banks and the big businesses, and a lot of people were getting much poorer, and the rich were getting richer. And if it was just setting the stage for the breakout and demands by people who say, we're socialists now, and we know this capitalism doesn't work. Well, it has nothing to do with capitalism. It has to do with Keynesianism, inflationism, central economic planning, the Federal Reserve, all that. And that's what we have to key in on, is try to get people to understand what the real cause of the economic crisis is all about. And it's not the virus. It's not the coronavirus that caused these problems. It aggravated it, precipitated it, and contributes to it. And what really contributes to the mess is the overreaction by our governments and the abuse of our civil liberties. It's similar to what happened after 9/11. We had 9/11, and we had, we have to protect the people. And so they passed the Patriot Act. Well, the Patriot Act didn't protect the people. It destroyed the civil liberties of a lot of people, and still does. So this is just another excuse for big government. And unfortunately, most of the time they take these things away, take our liberties away. They aren't restored after the crisis seems to have abated. But we'll have a responsibility of those of us who believe in liberty to make the case that, yes, this system is doomed. It's going to fail. It's going to get worse. But we better understand exactly what caused the problem and what we do about it. Excessive spending and zero interest rates and getting people to just spend more money. That can't be the solve. That was it can't solve the problem, because that was the problem. So it's an entirely different system. The biggest issue to deal with, as far as I'm concerned, is people now chime in and blame the free market. Oh yes, it's the free market that has done all this, and that's why we have to have a socialist economy. And we can do a better job than Venezuela, but no, we have to have socialism. Too many are lining up. They don't call it socialism, but they're lining up for their free stuff. And that's what that $2 trillion budget right now that they're proposing, on top of a $1 trillion deficit, $3 trillion, that won't be easily absorbed. And it's not going to improve the economy, because there's going to be a loss of confidence in the dollar and loss of confidence with us running the world and our empire. And therefore, we have to assume that there will be a rejection of the current system the people are going to have to decide which way they want to go. Allow the tyrants to take over completely, or fight the cause for liberty.
You know, you've been a champion of sound money, of constitutional money, of gold and silver. I feel like the world is reaching a point where gold could really be efficient for governments and for central banks to deleverage their books, as just like FDR did, by revaluing gold to $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 an ounce, especially because the largest debtor is the United States. It would work in the favor of the United States government to essentially, instead of defaulting or doing all kinds of other problematic actions that will be politically and geopolitically very dangerous, if they reprice the dollar or reprice gold and affect the dollar, all of these lenders will basically get a 50% haircut on whatever they're owed. I'm interested in understanding if you think that Washington, because we already heard Trump talking about a 50-year bond, and obviously it's going to be a big one, and you have the $4 trillion that is going to be small business loans that the Federal Reserve is doing. The Federal Reserve will have a $10 to $15 trillion balance sheet in 2 to 3 years. So do you think that gold has a real potential of being part of the new regulations at some point, like in the FDR days?
Well, I don't like to say it's a new regulation, and I don't like what FDR did. The first thing he did was steal the gold from the people. Then he devalued, so the people who held their gold got cheated. No, but the principle that you're talking about is correct, that if you allow the market to do that, that's a little bit different. You know, and the price of gold would go up. Debt could be paid off, and the government tries to get that to happen without paying for it. That's why they keep saying, well, we need the inflation rate, price inflation rate at 2%, then that will liquidate debt, which you were suggesting. But the market will do that. They're always, once this gets going, the government's going to do everything possible to contain it. But that's eventually how the debt gets liquidated. The governments never pay off the debt. When the debt gets so extreme, but it gets liquidated, it has to be liquidated. So it can be liquidated by sending the right people to Washington and people living within their means, cutting spending and balancing the budget. It's not going to happen. It won't happen politically. It's unacceptable. But the market is demanding that. So the market's going to demand the printing of money, and they're going to get the price inflation going. So if somebody owes, and you were alluding to this, if somebody owes $1 million, if they're devalued by 50%, you give them 50, you give them 500,000, half of it, and the debt, half of the debt is paid for. Governments want to liquidate debt by paying off all the debt with money that has been devalued. But you don't want the government to have that as a policy. The government should be out of it. And my position is that we should denationalize money, allow competing currencies to occur, so we wouldn't have to wait until the government resolves all this problem with the deficits. We start right away, that we make it so that it's convenient and legal to do your business in gold or silver. Because right now, only paper money per dollars are legal tender, and that's the hang up. But ultimately, the real issue is what do we want from our government? What should the size of government be? What should the role of government be? Because if the role of government is to pursue and try to work a way out how to pay for what the people want, whether it's socialized medicine and bailing out everybody, it's not going to work. What we have to do is change the attitude and get people to say, what I want from my government is a lot less. All I want is my liberties. And right now, for most of my lifetime, all I have seen is the taking away our liberties, and we have to change that attitude.
Dr. Paul, I wanted to ask you a question for a very long time about Trump's victory. Did it shock you? Did you think that he would win? And what do you think about the first term of Trump in office? If you were a special advisor to him, or if you were part of the administration, would you be pleased with the actions he's taken?
Now, there was some noise that came in, and I heard most of the question, but I didn't hear who that we were talking about. You're talking about Trump, right?
Yes, I was asking if you were shocked by his victory, initial victory, and if you were part of the administration, would you be pleased with what he's done?
Well, I didn't predict that Trump would win. I always considered that a campaign between who is the most hated person in the country that's running for office, and I guess they hated Hillary more. Uh, it's in some ways it's not as bad as it could have been. I think I've learned that his instincts aren't too bad. I think his ability to understand economics is not that good because he demanded more spending and lower interest rates, and he manipulated the stock market through pressuring the Federal Reserve. He has good instincts when it comes to foreign policy. I believe him when he said that Iraq was a stupid war and we shouldn't be fighting these wars. And, you know, so far he hasn't gotten us into any big war, but he persistently aggravates for conditions that will lead to war, such as with Iran. So it's a real mixed bag. And the one thing that doesn't make a lot of sense to me is because I give him a lot of credit for some good instincts, and he seems to go in that direction, but it falls apart because of his staff. The appointees, I don't know exactly why he ends up appointing people that contradicts a lot of his beliefs. So that to me is the big problem, and that's why we have to be very precise in what we believe in and do what we say, and then we can't be just hopeful and cross our fingers, but that's generally what we do. The arguments between Republicans and Democrats are usually pretty superficial. Then it gets into social things, and that isn't the real issue. The two parties support the Federal Reserve. They support deficit. Just think, $2 trillion, and there was not a whole lot of people arguing against that. It's just where it was going and some detail. When it comes to warmongering, yes, most of the neocons have complained a bit, but they're not too upset with Trump's position in the Middle East when it comes to, yes, we have to face up to this grand threat by Iran, and we'll even blame Iran for the viral spreading of the virus, in spite of the fact that our sanctions against Iran has made it so that they suffered way out of proportion to others, because we had already punished them with sanctions where they weren't even allowed to buy the proper medications and all these things. So it's a mixed bag on foreign policy, but if you want to look for some benefits and things, you find it, and you can hope to put some pressure on them to continue to take the position he did in the in the campaign, that those wars in the Middle East make no sense and we shouldn't have gotten into them.
Dr. Paul, yeah, I've been touring America since I was 13 years old. The first time I was in America, it was 1997 for my bar mitzvah. I went to Bulls games with my father. I still remember until this day. And from 2008, I've visited the United States basically every year for the past 12 years. And every time I come, I see less and less of a middle class. You can really see it in housing and in how neighborhoods look, and how it looks like there's an entire population that I call the left behinds, people that are not geared for the 21st century, that can hardly speak English well, even though they are Americans. They were born in America. Their English is just broken. They can't read and write well, but they come from the education system. They come from from America, from the people. Why is it that so many Americans are stuck in jobs that can never have a meaningful impact on the economy, very service-oriented, dead end? What needs to really change? Because it looks like the wealth disparity starts when you were born. The day that you were born, you either go this way or you're going this way in America. And I want to ask you, what do you think the root cause of it, and did you even agree?
The Problems are actually, you didn't even mention one thing that really emphasizes what you're visualizing, and that is just go to the inner cities and see how many people are sleeping outdoors. You know, cities like San Francisco and LA and New York, oh, what a mess. But you're pointing out something that was totally predictable and is easily to understand, and it has been explained to us by the Austrian economists. Mises did it very well, and they all agree. And his principle and position was, if you debase a currency, if you destroy a currency through inflationary procedures, that the middle class will be wiped out. For a healthy middle class and a much fairer distribution of wealth, that you have to have a sound currency, and you can't have favoritism through the financial system, the Federal Reserve. That is why, you know, the main motivation for me to run for Congress way back in the 70s had to do with the breakdown of the Bretton Woods Agreement and the monetary system and the power of the Fed. And it just has continually gotten worse. 1971 was a big change when they threw in the towel and said, you know, the use of gold is just restraining big government. So we got rid of that. So if you, and I think the far left are correct when they argue this case that you were making, that there is a disparity in wealth distribution. And the one thing you can point out is the wealth, the system of capitalism is supposed to work by people working, spending what they have to survive, and saving something or investing it, and that is the capital. But we've been taught for decades by our professors, savings are not necessary. Deficits don't matter. You can have what you want. You can fight your wars and have a welfare state. But when they print the money because of the economy, or you want to keep the stock market up, which is the biggest driver of the stock of the Federal Reserve, is that they get the money first. The corporations get the money. And by the time that money circulates, and the deficits that expand, prices go up. There's price inflation today, even though they claim there isn't price inflation. And the price inflation is going to get much worse. So the middle class is even going to get poorer. And it's going to play havoc. But it's because of the distribution of the money, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. So in a way, the far left use that to say, see, it doesn't work. Capitalism doesn't work. Free markets aren't any good. They're so unfair. They always benefit the very wealthy. Well, people have to understand that in a free society and a free market, people can get wealthy, but they shouldn't get wealthy because of any assistance from the federal government or the monetary authorities. Government shouldn't make them rich. They shouldn't get rich because they build fighter jets. So this kind of thing. So in that way, which in our earlier years, it was far from perfect, but we were on the right track because we were known in the United States to have the biggest middle class ever, but not anymore, because we were also slipped way down on the list that are considered to be the freest country in the world. We're probably down at 15 or 16 now. Other countries now are saying we're freer than the Americans are. So, and that's going to get worse because we are broke, we are bankrupt, and whether it's coronaviruses or the stock market crash or the wars that we plan to fight and the military-industrial complex, that attitude hasn't changed yet, but it will change because we won't be able to afford it. We will bring our troops home, and the welfare system will have to get some adjustment, and we will have to once again believe that there's nothing wrong, nothing immoral with having people work for a living and taking care of themselves, and not assume that their neighbor can be forced to take care of them because we can send the IRS agent and take from our neighbors whatever we want, and that will be the road to prosperity. No, we're on the road to serfdom, and that's what we should be working on stopping.
Dr. Pohl,
okay.
If the elections are postponed, like many of the primaries are, what is the guidance of the Constitution? If a president's term is ended and there hasn't been an election, does the president stay or revert back to the line of succession? Who would be the Speaker of the House? What happens in that sort of an event? Is it something that is worth even considering at this point?
Say that again. What was the event? What was the event that make the problem?
So if coronavirus causes a postponed election, like some of the primaries are already postponed, what is the guidance? Okay. What is the guidance for the Constitution? The president, if his term ends, does he have to follow a line of succession? who would be the Speaker of the House?
Okay,
what
yeah.
would happen to Congress?
Well, it's written there. If something happens to the president, we know what the sequence is. But if it happens where we have this crisis in the fall and there's no election, there's only one thing that can stop it. It's completely wrong. It's immoral. It's unconstitutional, and it's a disaster. The only way that gets stopped is the people rise up and say, "No way! You can't do this," and demand that it not happen. But that's where the real crisis comes. I'm pessimistic on the short run, but not on the long run. And even with my pessimism about what the coronavirus is doing and the financial markets, I'm still not quite to the point that we should think that there's not going to be a presidential election in the fall. Things are bad, but the biggest thing that we do is we control the president. So even if we get somebody a little more independent than the others, like a Trump, it seems like policies don't really change. The spending continues. The Federal Reserve is there. We don't bring our troops home. The rhetoric changes, but it also continues. So I just don't think that's going to happen. Where we won't have an election. But the problems we're talking about and the solution for this doesn't come from the politicians, not from Washington. And the universities are no source of it right now. They're completely with, the welfareism, socialism, authoritarianism, and that's a mess. But there's a lot of other things going on today, and that's in the independent institutes, and like Mises Institute and what we try to do on our website. There's a growing number of people who know exactly what's going on. There's a growing number of people, probably 75% of the people in this country don't believe the government anymore. That's healthy, because they shouldn't believe them, because they're always lying to us. They lie us into war, and they lie us into trusting the Federal Reserve. As long as you get your hand out, it's okay. Okay, give me another question or two, because I better think about leaving.
Dr. Paul, that's all the questions I have for you today, sir.
Oh, okay. It worked out pretty good then. Well, I'm glad to be with you today.
I was very happy to have hosted you, and I'm expecting to hear good news about your son, obviously.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ron Paul. Thank you very much.